It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Yehudit Rotem. Your maiden name was Weingarten, and you were born in Hungary, in Budapest. And Judith, if you could tell us a little bit about your family and how you managed to go on the Kastner Train.
Okay. I was born in Budapest on the 13th of June 42. My family was Hungarian Orthodox Jew, quite well, איך אומרים, עשירים? Well off, quite well off. My grandfather had a big store of men's garments and clothes, and my father worked with him. My father was very religious, very Orthodox religious. He has two brothers and one sister. And my father also was very active in Agudat Israel, in Tzeirai Agudat Israel.
The youth.
The youth of Agudat Israel. He was one of the leaders. And one day he came home and told my mother, Erzsi, my mother's name was Elizabeth, and she came from the south of Hungary. And he told her that he got 4 certificates for the Kastner Train. Kastner was one of the leaders of the Va'ada of how to save Jewish people in Budapest. He was one of the leaders. He came from Transylvania, from Kolozsvár. He wasn't from Budapest. And my father told my mother that he got 4 certificates for them, for my mother, father, and for me and my younger sister, Ruti, who was 1 year old. I was 2 years old. At that time, 2 of my mother's sisters, Agnes, who was 20, or about 20, and the youngest sister, they were 5 sisters at that time. At that time, 2 of my mother's sisters, Agnes and Kati, came to help her with us, with the babies, because before that, my mother had helped Hungarian girls, and then it was forbidden to have Hungarian or Aryan or German help. So my grandfather sent to my mother his 2 of his 5 daughters, 4 daughters, because my mother was married at that time. So and he wrote her a letter that she must promise him that wherever she goes with her husband, with my father, she will take her 2 sisters. And she promised him that wherever they go, she will take her 2 sisters. So when my father told her that they have 4 certificates for the train, she didn't understand anything. She didn't understand what it meant, the train, Kastner, but she said, what will be with my 2 sisters? I promised my father to take them with me. And my father said, I don't know. We have only 4 certificates. They are young, they will manage. Don't worry for them. And my mother said, if we don't take our 2 sisters, I stay here with the babies. I don't go anywhere without my sisters. So he didn't know what to do. And at night, he went with his mother, my grandmother, whose name was Blanca, and she was very clever, and she was managing the big store of her husband in Dobuca, in the center of the Jewish area in Budapest. So she went with my father, my grandmother, and my father, went to they call him Rosh HaKol. Rosh HaKol, that means the head of the community, of the Orthodox community. His name was, what was his name? Oh my God. And he was a relative of my mother, because my mother, on one of her ancestors was the Rabbi Chatam Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Sofer. And he was called, and he was from the same family of the Chatam Sofer. So my grandmother and my father went to him, to the Rosh HaKahal, to the head of the community, and somehow they managed to get 2 more certificates. I don't know if they paid for it or not. Maybe they paid because the prominence, that means the rich people, paid some money for the community in order that some other people would come who don't have money would also go on the train, because the Nazi officer who enabled this train, he wanted money for it. So my parents, it was about a week before the day of the train. It was the 30th of June. And from what I know, because my parents spoke very little about the whole thing, from what I knew that the 2 girls, Agi and Koti, were already on the train to Auschwitz. And in the last minute, someone came and took them from the train to Auschwitz to the train of Kastner, the last minute. So we saved them. We saved our 2 aunts, Kati and Agi and Kati. But on the same time, they saved us, because my parents didn't understand anything about it. They arrived to the train. It was in Keleti. Keleti was one of the train station in Budapest. Keleti, it means the eastern train station. There is Nugati and Keleti, and Keleti was on the eastern part. So my parents didn't understand what was. They were sure that they are going on the train, and after 2 days or 3 days, they will arrive in Portugal, and they will be saved because Portugal was a neutral country. But what happened is that the train was rolling and rolling and rolling in Austria and Germany, and people were hysterical. And on one of the stations, they shaved the women's heads, and people became ill. And my sister and I, we had dysentery, diarrhea, shilshul. We were very ill. And in one of the stations in Austria was called Auschwitz. So people thought it was Auschwitz, and they jumped from the train, and some were killed. And it was from what I know, it was about 3 weeks that the train was making these roundabouts in Austria and Germany. And after 3 weeks, they arrived in a place called Celle in Germany. And then they were commanded to step down from the train. And there was in Celle a Misdar, how do you call it? They have a name for it in Germany. That all the people had to wait, to stand for 6 hours until they were counted. And after 6 hours in Celle, they were commanded to walk. And they walked 6 hours in the rain. It was raining, and in spite of it was in summer, in June, but no, in July already. But they had to go in the rain for 6 hours until they arrived to the concentration camp called Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen is a very famous place, but it was not an extermination camp. People were not taken to the gas chambers, but still they were dying in thousands. They were dying because there was no food, no medicines, nothing. And we were very, very ill since the train, and my father and my mother were separated, like all of the people there in the train. The men were put in a place or in a certain part of the concentration camp. It was called the men camp, and the women were in the women side. But it was all of this compound was called Machaneh HaMishpachot, families camp. So my mother stayed with her 2 sisters and her 2 babies in the women's part, and she was very depressed and she couldn't take care of us. So our 2 aunts were holding us all the time. So they were saved by us, but they saved us. It was like this. And what I know is that my parents didn't take diapers with them, or enough diapers, and they didn't take winter clothes. They were not ready for it. They were not prepared for they didn't understand. I don't know if other people were more knowledgeable about what's going to happen, but my parents did not understand anything. And my father stayed there, and he was in the same barrack with the rabbi of Satmar, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, and he took care of the rabbi. So we had some experience, spiritual, I don't know. He was very, very Orthodox, my father, so maybe it was good for him to be in the presence of such a big rabbi, which, I'm not on this side at all, because he was anti-Zionist, and all the rabbis who said that God will save us, and then they were saved, but their people were not.
It's very controversial.
It's not controversial. It's very clear. It's very clear. And my mother was, they told you, she was very depressed, and she didn't have any energy to do anything. And my aunts were all the time holding us, because we were very, 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 very sick, very, very ill. And I remember that once I asked my mother, how did you manage if you didn't bring enough diapers for us? And she was blushing and very ashamed, and she lowered her eyes and didn't say anything at first, and then she said to me, I stole. At nights she went out and there were other babies, so she took diapers from there were like this, Hevel Kvisa, how you say it, like a
laundry line.
Yes. And she stole for us. And sometimes we laugh at it, that sometimes it's because my very good friend, Naomi Waldman, and she is the wife of Professor Asa Kasher. She was also with her mother and her young sister. She was the same age like me, Naomi. We are very, very good friends, and her sister Dalia is like my sister Ruti. So sometimes we make jokes, and I tell her, Naomi, my mother stole diapers from your mother. And she said, and that's why we are so good friends. But it's just a joke, you know. I don't know who was the families that my mother was, you know, taking the diapers from their laundry lines. And that's what I know about my family. And then the war was ended, and my parents went to Switzerland to a refugee camp. And there they united again, my parents, and my mother became pregnant with my third sister, with my sister Rina. And she told me that all the time she wanted to make an abortion because she was so afraid. She didn't know what's going to be, and she was broken mentally and physically. And there was a nice Jewish doctor, woman doctor there, and she was all the time going around her, and the doctor told her, Erzike, mit okos, what do you want from me? Why do you go all the time around me? And my mother wanted to ask her to help her to abort the baby because she was very afraid. What's going to be now with nothing, no family, no language, no money, nothing. And they were so desperate. But she was ashamed to ask the doctor, you know, in many words. So she didn't say anything, and the baby was born after they come to Israel. My third sister, Rina. That's that. That's what I know about the family, about the camp. But I asked a mother of my very good friend. I have a very good friend in London. She was a judge. Her name is Vera Meyer. And her mother, Zsuzsa, she was 18 when she was on the train and in the camp. And from her, I grasped some details about the everyday life in the camp. So it's not from my parents. My parents spoke very little, as I said, but Zsuzsa, God bless her, Zichronah Livracha, she told me about the everyday, and I wrote about it in this book, Matai Tavo Elai, as part of the plot, not as memories, because it's not my memories. But she told me about the everyday life, how people, they didn't do anything. It wasn't a work concentration camp. People didn't work. They all just were waiting for something. They didn't know what they were waiting for. They just somehow lived on very little food, very, very bad conditions. There was a place where people came to, איך אומרים? לעשות את הצרכים שלהם.
To relieve themselves.
Yeah, there was a place that they went. There were brazim, berez, taps, and they came to. And from time to time they had some, I don't know how they washed themselves. That was the place where everybody went to לעשות את הצרכים שלהם. It was terrible, but they were not killed. But still people died there.
There's a lot of typhus.
Thousands.
A lot of typhus, a lot of
Yes,
diseases.
they were ill, they had all kind of diseases, and it was terrible. Anna Frank died there, many thousands and thousands. And when you see in the films of the time that people were dying and the corpses were thrown into holes, that's from Bergen-Belsen.
Yeah.
So we were very, very lucky to stay alive.
And Yehudit, can I ask, your grandparents and relatives that didn't go on the train, did any survive?
My grandparents were hiding somewhere, but they couldn't come to Israel. They came only after when I was about 9 years old or 8 years old somehow. I don't know the story because Hungary was communist at that time. Maybe there was some agreement about uniting families, I don't know. But they arrived, and also one of my uncles and his family also arrived about that time. First arrived my grandparents, and then my uncle and his family.
Do you recall, do you remember meeting the...
And I remember, what I remember is that after the war, my uncle, my father's brother arrived in Israel. His name was Alexander, and he was a hero in the underground of the Zionist underground in Budapest, and he wore a Nazi uniform in the middle of the war. Yes, in the middle of the Nazi invasion in Budapest, he wore it was called it was the fascist.
The Arrow Cross.
Yes,
Arrow Cross.
Yes, Slava Barzel. In Hungarian it was called, תכף אני זוכר, I don't know why I forget now names. Because it's difficult for me to speak in English. And so my hero uncle, he was saving people. He went with his Nazi or his fascist uniform. He saw Jewish people were taken to the Danube, and he said, "Oh, I'm an officer. I have to take them some other place." And in this way, he saved a lot of people.
What? Do you remember his name?
Of course, I said Alexander Weingarten. Shimon Tzvi in Hebrew, and in Hungarian he was called, at home he was called Shoni, because in Hungarian Alexander is Shandor, and the shortening of the name Shandor is Shani. So at home he was called Shoni, and Shoni saved many people. He is even, his story is in the Hungarian museum, Jewish museum in Tzfat. So he saved many people, and he arrived in Israel, and very, very quickly after he arrived, he was taken to the Israeli army, and he was killed. He was killed on the way to Jerusalem, on the castle, and he is buried in the Har Herzl, Alexander Shimon Tzvi. And my grandmother didn't know about it. She wasn't told about that her youngest son was killed. So when they came to Israel, after some years after the independence of Israel, and they lived with us at first in Givat Shmuel. We lived at first, and then they moved to Tel Aviv, and they lived in Shchunat, in neighborhood called Yad Eliyahu. And after she knew about what happened to her youngest son, she developed a heart disease, and she died suddenly when she was 65. I remember her very lovingly, but I was very young. When she died, I was 10 years old. That's the story.
Tragedy. That's such a tragedy.
Yes. And every Yom HaZikaron, every Memorial Day, my family, we go to his place, to his last place in Har Herzl, and we light candles. And on the same train of thoughts, we also remember Dr. Kastner, who saved our family, who saved my family, my parents' family, my aunt Aggie, who also have a lot of grandchildren and great-grandchildren and my aunt Cotty, who lived in Canada, in Toronto, and she also had a family. And every Memorial Day, Yom HaShoah, we gather near Dr. Kastner house or place in Rehov, in some street in Tel Aviv, and we remember him, and we make some, we light candles, we bring, מה זה? As I said, my family took the part of the shotkim. They were silent. You know, I divide the Holocaust survivors into two parts. One were speaking and were very eloquent and very expressive about what happened. And the other part were silent, and they didn't speak, and they didn't tell us, my sisters and me. So this was, my family took the part of the shotkim, of the silent. And because of this, as a writer, it was very, very important for me to tell the stories of the survivors. But not mine, because I knew very little. What I told less is everything I know. I don't have any secrets, or I don't hide anything. I know this and not more than this. So many people came to me in the 80s and asked me to write their stories. And I wrote about 40 or 50, I never counted how many books. Everyone who wanted to tell me his story, I wrote it for him. I didn't do it as a volunteer, they paid for it. But so it helped me to raise my children. I was a single mother of 7 after I divorced my Haredi husband. But even it was a agreement between me and them, and I did it with all my heart. And it was very, very important for me to tell the stories of the survivors. And many stories were so hard to write, and sometimes I felt that I'm going crazy, but still I did it. And even now, so many years after the Holocaust, there are stories, some of people who survived and who are now in the 90s. Some stories are still to be written. They didn't do it before, and now they want to do it. Or sometimes it's the story of the family, and it goes in the family, and so I do it even now, and also 2 of my daughters. I have 1 son and 6 daughters. 2 of my daughters are also writers. Tamar, my eldest daughter, and Nurit, my youngest. And they write the stories. When we have the zchut, the privilege to hear it, we are very attentive, very listening. We listen to the stories, and as we also have our story, we feel very close to the stories, and we want to tell them. So I think that the Holocaust is like the atomic Kur atomi, how you say it? A Kur atomi in Chernobyl, which is still have its it's not finished. The Shoah is never finished. It will have its influence, and maybe sometimes its inspiration for many years ahead. It's not finished, and maybe it will never finish. And what we should learn from the Shoah, that we have to be very רחמנים. עם ישראל זה רחמנים.
Merciful.
מה?
Merciful. We have to
Merciful.
be very kind.
Very kind. And we have to feel very empathic to every kind of suffering, not only Jewish suffering, also the whole world. We have all kinds of sufferings, and if someone wants to give his kilya, to his kidney, and to say that it goes only to Jewish people, it makes me very sad and angry, because people were born b'tzelem Elohim. The katuv, it's written, we are the same. Even if we are not Jewish, we are people, we are bnei Adam, and we are equal to anyone. We didn't choose where to be born. We didn't choose to be Jewish. We were born Jewish, but everyone didn't choose his birth or his identity. So we have to feel like part of the whole humanity, and this is what we have to learn from the Shoah. It happened to the Jewish people, but it happened in some other places also, in Africa, everywhere it could be, because I don't understand why people are bad, why people have this. It's written, Yetzer Lev Adam Ra Mineurav. It's written that we have this bad part, bad Yetzarim, bad sides in our personality. But it's not necessarily so. We can not ignore, but we can win our bad part. We can להתגבר.
You can overcome.
To overcome our bad side. To teach ourselves to be better. This is I think that this is the main goal or main aim of being alive, to be better, to make ourselves better people.
Well, Judith, I just want to thank you, because I'm so incredibly grateful.
תודה רבה לך. Thank you.
So Judith, for me, this has been such a zchut, such an honor and a privilege, and your message is so important. It really is. If only people would listen to that message, because we have to learn from what happened, and we have to be kind and show empathy, and what happened to us should never be repeated.
כן, איך אומרים, יש עוד מילה לרחמים. There is mercy to...
There's compassion.
We have to be more compassionate, yes?
Well, it's been such a zchut, such an honor and a privilege, and you should only have mazel and bracha, and I'm so grateful to you.
תודה רבה.
In kol halev, from the bottom of my heart, I'm so grateful. It's been very special, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. You have